Today, November 11th, 2024, the Talk Shop is proud to salute our military veterans. In Studio 255 at the Laramie Plains Civic Center this morning, I have the honor of being able to interview Rip Maselli. And good morning, Rip.
Good morning.
Most genuinely appreciate your service. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
We're in Studio 255, and my first question, Rip Maselli, where are you from? Where's hometown original?
Well, I was born in Lindsay, California, a small rural community. In 1960, we moved to Visalia, California. So that would probably technically be my hometown. I went to school there, went to high school there. We had two high schools. I went in Redwood. I went to Redwood. We had an intense rivalry. And I kind of think I'm probably pretty typical of the average young American male at the time.
When you live your life today, how often do you go home? How often do you go home to your hometown?
Well, physically, we've been here in Wyoming almost 4 years, and I've only been back once, and that was just recently.
Yeah. Is that about living today and not yesterday? Is that about that, or is it just about different days tomorrow and today, or what's behind that in your eyes?
Well, we actually went back to visit my elderly sister, she's going to be 89 years old. She's not really doing too well, so that's why we went back. But I've pretty much divorced myself from California. When I was a kid, it was a nice place. California was a nice place to live, and it just got absolutely terrible. And so we escaped almost 4 years ago and moved to Wyoming.
When I think about my younger years, I think about stories of other family members, my grandfather, my father, my cousins, uncles, and their military service. How were you raised in your hometown and growing up regarding the United States of America?
Actually, my father was born in Italy, and his family came to the United States in the early 1900s. My mother's people were from Sicily, but she was born in the United States. As far as military service, my mother's brother, Vincent, was a World War I veteran. He never did go overseas, so he didn't see any combat, but he was in the United States. I had one cousin on the Maselli side who was briefly in the military during World War II, but apparently fell out of the back of a truck, was injured, and was discharged. I had another cousin who served in World War II, was a U.S. Army Air Force aviator, but he never saw any overseas service. And had another couple of cousins through marriage, Harlan and Norman Aubrey. They were brothers. Harlan was in the Marine Corps and was killed in action on Iwo Jima. Harlan's brother, Norman, immediately joined the military, but was too late to see any combat in World War II. He stayed in the reserves, was called back into active duty in Korea and fought in Korea. Interestingly, Norman also participated in the invasion of Alcatraz Island after World War II, when there was a riot and the inmates had taken over a couple of cell blocks, and they called in the Marines to quell the riot. So he participated in that.
What year were you born?
I was born in 1947.
And what age were you when you entered military service?
I guess I was about probably 20, because I celebrated my 21st birthday in Vietnam.
Was it important to serve your country where you did so willingly and in advance of being called, or did you answer the call?
Well, basically, like just the average American male at the time, I was an average student, maybe below average. I wasn't one of the popular kids in school. I was kind of interested in mechanical stuff, cars, did the auto shop thing. Friday and Saturday night we cruised around in cars, and I was interested in the ladies, sports. When I graduated from high school, I think in an effort, and this was probably fairly universal at the time, I decided to go to college. We had a junior college in town. And I think a lot of it was for the educational exemption, which prevented me from being drafted at the time. And I was an architecture major. I thought that might be interesting. I hated it. I hated college. It was, a lot of the guys said it was high school with ashtrays. So I actually went one school year and then dropped out. The assumption was I probably would get drafted, but you always kind of hope you'll fall through a crack. But probably late in 1967, I received a letter that instructed me to go to Fresno to the Army Reception Station to take a physical and for testing. So I did that, and physical was kind of rudimentary. I think they checked our blood pressure and vision and not much else. I took a written test, which was kind of interesting in the fact that sitting in front of me was a young Hispanic man, about my age, I guess. The sergeant was handing out the tests, and he said to the sergeant, "No habla español, el sargento." He didn't speak English. So the sergeant looked at him, and then he looked at me. I was right behind him. And he says, "You look smart." And he handed me 2 tests. He says, "You do his too." So I did that. I asked the kid, I says, "¿Cómo se llama? What is your name?" And I put it on the test and completed the 2 tests and turned them in. And ended up going home. So very shortly thereafter, I received my draft notice in the mail. And I was inducted February 8th, 1968. Got on a bus, went to Fresno. One of the things they did at the reception station is they got us in a long line, and we counted off by 4s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the sergeant there informed us that they were also drafting for the United States Marine Corps. And he said, everybody whose number was 4 is now in the Marines. And I had said 4. I thought, I'm in deep doo-doo. And the kid that was standing next to me said, put his hand up, and the sergeant says, "What do you want?" And the kid said, I came with a buddy of mine, and we wanted to go in the service together. And he said he was a number 4. He's going in the Marines. Can I switch with somebody and go in the Marines with him? And the sergeant looked at me and he said, do you want to be in the Marines? And I said, no, sir, Sergeant. So he grabbed us, each of us by the arm, and he switched us in line, and he told the kid, you are now in the Marine Corps and you were in the Army. So I was kind of delighted by that small improvement. And we flew to Fort Lewis, Washington, and I began basic training. Now, the first week we were in basic, they loaded us on buses, and we went to what was like a large warehouse. And inside there were long tables and folding chairs. And we started taking a series of written tests, and I assume it was to try to find out what aptitude we had for certain military occupations. And I think we were there 2 days, I'm not too sure, but about a week later, as a matter of fact, I think it was exactly 7 days later, we were bused back to that same location, and there were a series of offices in that building, and each individual recruit was called into an office, and inside that office was a sergeant. And when I went in, the fellow was a young buck sergeant, probably just a little bit older than I was. He was cordial, which was the first person I'd met in my military service that was cordial. And he informed me that I did very well on the aptitude test, that I was a smart young man. And he said I had qualified for all sorts of wonderful Army occupations. And I think I said, well, that's great. And he said, well, that's not so great. So I asked why. And he said, since I was a draftee, my commitment was 2 years. And he said, some of these schools are quite lengthy and extensive. And by the time I completed the school, I probably wouldn't have a great deal of Army service time left. So he said it's not cost productive for the Army to send you to these schools. And he said, his exact words, if I can remember them correctly, were, are you going to go to the infantry? You're going to go to Vietnam, and you'll probably be killed. Those were his exact words. And I said, well, is there any way I can get out of it? And he said, matter of fact, there is. He says, if you would join the Army, that would add 1 year to your commitment. That'd be 3 years. That would allow you to go to any school of your choosing. And the Army would get their money's worth out of you. And I says, well, what's the process? And he says, well, we'll discharge you, and then you'll re-enlist, and you'll do that today. We have all the paperwork here for you to sign. I said, let's do it. So I was discharged, technically.
From 2 years of service commitment to a 3 year.
Yeah, to a 3 year service. So I signed all the paperwork, and technically that gave me, surprisingly, it gave me 7 years or 7 days prior service, which qualified that as a re-enlistment, which actually was to my advantage later on in the service. So we looked through these schools. He showed me the ones I was eligible for, and being kind of a car nut, I kind of wanted something maybe mechanical, and there was one that was multi-engine tandem rotor helicopter repair school. And I thought this sounded interesting. It's got 2 engines, that's kind of neat. Multiple rotor, that's kind of neat. So that's what I signed up for. 67U20 is the numerical designation of the school. So I completed basic training. Went to Fort Eustis, which is in Virginia. Fort Eustis is the U.S. Army's transportation center. Anything that had anything to do with transporting material or personnel in the Army was located there. They had ships and trucks and trains, and I didn't know the military had trains. Aircraft, helicopters, and both fixed wing. And that's where I received my training for school.
And where was that school at, Rip?
Fort Eustis, Virginia.
Okay.
It was near, fairly near the coast, if I remember correctly. And every day we got into buses and we rode out to Felker Field, which was the airfield on the Army air post, or on the Army post. They had a rotary wing and fixed wing aircraft there. And that's where I received my training. They had a lot of old aircraft that probably had been timed out. They were in hangars, Hueys and Chinooks, which I trained on. They had some stuff that wasn't in use anymore. Helicopters that utilized air-breathing combustion engines like H-34s and H-21s, which was a tandem rotor helicopter. It looked like a banana. They called it the flying banana. Terrible, terrible helicopter. The climate back there in Virginia in the summertime was pretty warm and humid. H-21 couldn't take off vertically. They'd have to taxi out and get on the runway and take off like an airplane. And I think at the time the H-21 school was not in operation anymore. But basically what we did is we received instruction on the particular aircraft, the Chinook. We had aircraft that we could take apart in the hangar and put back together. We were instructed on the aircraft's systems and capabilities and stuff of that sort, and basically trained as mechanics. And at the completion of the school, we were given a card that had 3 lines on it, and what it was we had a choice of where we wanted to be assigned. So everybody in the class knew that there was only one place we were probably going. It was like helicopters were only used at one place in the world, and of course they weren't. So I put down Vietnam. I knew I was going. And before we left, we received some additional training. We went and got our shots, and it was separated by specific areas. Like I got into a line that was for Southeast Asia. And I got talking to some of the fellows in the line there, and I said, well, it looks like we're going to Vietnam. And they said, well, we're not, we're going to Hawaii. I didn't know there were helicopters in Hawaii, but they were. So on September 13th, 1968, I was technically assigned to the 101st Airborne Division. 7 days later, I was in Vietnam. We landed at Cam Ranh Bay. When they cracked the door of the airliner open, you could actually smell the country. It had a very distinct smell, kind of a jungly smell, and with maybe a dash of feces, I think. And it was very, very hot and humid. So the 101st Airborne had a base camp in Long Binh. So we went to Long Binh for 2 weeks for in-country training. And basically it was physical conditioning and training so we could acclimate ourselves with the country. We went to the range. We fired the M16 again. They had some areas where there were kind of jungle-like that we went to, and we were shown booby traps and bunker installations and things like that that we might encounter. And kind of interestingly, when we first arrived at Cameron Bay, we went to kind of a reception station, and it was a relatively built-up area. They had fixed restrooms, and I walked into a restroom, and there was a fella shaving there, and he looked in the mirror and looked at me, and I looked in the mirror and looked at him, and he said, "Rip, what the hell are you doing here?" And I said, "Warren, I didn't know you were here." It was Warren Baird. I went to college with him. He was another car nut. And I said, "What are you doing, Warren?" He said, "Well, I'm fixing to go home." He said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I just got here." He said, "Oh, crap." So anyway, we talked for a bit, and I don't really remember if I ever saw Warren when I got back home again. I think I did. But
in your 3 year service, how long was training before you were sent to Vietnam?
well, we had basic training, which I think was around 12 weeks. Advanced training at Fort Eustis was, I think, about 12 weeks. And immediately thereafter is when I went to Vietnam. And
you met a college. You met a person
was
from
the
home.
only person in the 24 months I was in Vietnam that I met that I knew. I talked to another guy when I got home. He was in Vietnam the same time I was and was fairly close to where I was stationed. He told me he had gone to Camp Eagle, where my company was based, and he had tried to find me, but I was flying at the time. So he said he missed me. That fella died of a drug overdose just a few months later. Heroin overdose.
Upon coming home?
Yeah. It's too bad. He was a nice kid. I was assigned to B Company, 159th Assault Support Helicopter Battalion. In the northern part of the country was divided into 3 sections. There was 1 Corps, 2 Corps, and 3 Corps. 1 Corps was the northern part of the country, 2 Corps was the Central Highlands, and 3 Corps was the southern part of the country. We called it I Corps instead of 1 Corps. I was technically assigned to the 649th TC detachment, which was a maintenance detachment, which was assigned to B Company, the 159th. There were 3 Chinook companies in the northern part of the country. A Company, the Pachyderms. B Company was varsity call sign. C Company, a terrible name, Playtex. I think the insinuation was that it supported the division. Anyway, I started out working as a mechanic. The original company was formed at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. It was the 272nd Assault Helicopter Company. And they had come to Vietnam, and they had been there probably maybe 4 to 5 months. And they originally went to the southern part of the country, were based at Phuket, and then went up north and became part of the 101st Aviation Battalion. And that's when they become B Company, 159th. A lot of really great guys. I started working, basically what we did was mostly heavy maintenance, which was a replacement of major components in the aircraft. We did transmission replacements, not engine replacements, but rotor head replacements, blade replacements, a lot of the stuff that required heavy equipment to actually remove and replace the components. And I guess I had kind of an aptitude for it. I learned as much as I could. I had good teachers, and enjoyed working on the helicopters. We were together with the aviation part of the company, but we were somewhat separate too. And one day, I think it was maybe a couple months or 3 months into my tour, once we did maintenance on the aircraft, when the maintenance was complete, a tech rep would come out and inspect the work, make sure it was proper and safe. And then the aircraft had to be test flown before it could go back into service. And the TC detachment we had maintenance pilots, and they flew the aircraft, and usually the aircraft's flight engineer and crew chief went on the test flight. And I learned that the maintenance guys, if they wanted to, they could fly on the test flights as a door gunner. And I said, you can? So I went out on a test flight, and I absolutely loved it. So I flew whenever I could on the test flights, and finally decided that I would try to get on the flight platoon. Went and talked to a lieutenant that was in charge we had 2 flight platoons, and he was in charge of first flight platoon, and told him I wanted to become an air crew member. So he kind of interviewed me and said he'd get back to me, and I was selected to become an air crew member. That was probably late 1968 or early 1969. And I started out as a gunner. And within a short period of time, I was selected to become a crew chief. And usually flight engineers and crew chiefs, it was 3-man enlisted crew, they were paired together. They stayed together all the time. So I went through a series of flight engineers who mentored me and taught me what was required to become a flight engineer. And the last one I had was a Spec 6, E6 fellow. Had been in the Army for quite a while. His name was Bob Floyd. He was a great big hulking black man. But Bob taught me probably most of the skills I actually needed to be a flight engineer. And I flew with Bob for a while, and Bob went to the flight platoon lieutenant and said he's ready. So I was given my own aircraft, and kind of the way the system worked was the flight engineer was given a helicopter. And it was his responsibility to make sure that helicopter was flyable, everything was operational on the ship, so that when the pilots came out in the morning to fly missions, they would fly. And I can't remember the tail number of the first ship I got. It was a B model. It was older. It was almost timed out. I flew that particular aircraft for a while. And then that aircraft was timed out, went back to the States to be rebuilt, and I got a brand new B model. It was actually a rebuilt B model, 482, a great helicopter. And I flew in that helicopter for a while. That was mine. And then later in 1969, we started to receive what we call the Super C models. The regular C model Chinook helicopter had the same engines as the B models. The Super Cs, though, had a high horsepower Lycoming engine, had two of them, and they were both rated at 3,750 shaft horsepower. The Super C could pick up a lot of weight, so much that on the bottom of the aircraft, about a 3-foot white triangle was painted on the belly, so that when we went to pick up sling loads, the riggers would know that the aircraft was capable of carrying more weight. And we carried cargo internally, and we carried cargo externally in sling loads. So as a flight engineer, one of the jobs was managing the aircraft, plus whenever we carried internal loads, manage the placement of the loads, because that was critical because of the center of gravity of the aircraft. It wouldn't fly properly if the loads weren't situated properly. And then to carry external loads, in the center of the aircraft, about the area of the center of gravity, there was about a 3-foot square hole in the bottom of the airframe. There was a titanium girder or a rail that was curved, and it was mounted inside that hole. And on that titanium rail was a hydraulic cargo hook. So to properly carry sling loads of material, the flight engineer laid on the floor where he could observe the load, and he also managed the pickup and delivery of the load. A rigger would stand on top of the load, and would have a cargo sling, and there would be what we called a donut that he would slip over the hook. So the flight engineer would, by conveying instructions to the pilot, would tell the pilot how to maneuver the aircraft so that it would be centered over the load, and the rigger would be able to hook the load up. And then the rigger would jump off, and the flight engineer would give the pilot instructions to raise the aircraft up and the load to a certain altitude, generally about 20 feet, and then release him to go ahead and fly the aircraft to the destination. And you would lay there on the floor and monitor the load, because the load sometimes, depending on what it was, would tend to oscillate or do kind of strange things. So for the safety of the aircraft, if the load would oscillate, you could alleviate some of that by speeding up or slowing down, and you would give the pilot instructions. And then when you arrived at your destination, you would give him instructions where to place the load specifically, and then we would leave and go get another load. Generally, they scripted missions every day. They had a certain number of missions, and you were assigned missions just as you completed other ones. They would usually get us up the air crews about 3:30 in the morning. We'd go to the mess hall and get breakfast. We'd be on the flight line about 4 in the morning. We'd pre-flight the aircraft. We'd open up the inspection doors, the tunnel covers, inspect the drive shafting. I would actually, as a flight engineer, the Chinook had a small turbine engine in the tail. It was an auxiliary power unit. I would get in the cockpit in the pilot's seat. I would start the auxiliary power unit, small turbine engine. I would run the flight controls, the cyclic, the control stick. I would run the collective, which was a lever that changed the pitch of the helicopter blades. I would put my feet on the yaw pedals and move them back and forth. The yaw pedals enable the helicopter to turn on its axis, either on the center of the aircraft, the nose, or the tail. Basically make sure the aircraft was flyable. About 5 o'clock, 5:30 or so, the pilots would come out. We'd have an aircraft commander, sat in the left seat. We'd have a pilot. Sometimes the pilots were fairly new, in which case the AC, the aircraft commander, would probably be an IP, an instructor pilot. Sometimes the pilots weren't as experienced or skilled as was deemed necessary, so that's why they flew as pilots. The aircraft commander would have me and the pilot pre-flight the aircraft again, and when that was completed, we close everything up. We get in our positions and we fire the ship up.
How many were on a crew?
5.
5.
Aircraft commander, pilot, flight engineer, crew chief, which technically he flew on the right side of the aircraft, was also a door gunner. The gunner who was on the left side, the port side of the aircraft. We got most of our gunners actually came from infantry units. Some were actually, we got out of the unit. We never generally got the same gunner. There was a gunner's pool, and that morning they'd assign somebody to fly. He'd go to the armory, get a couple of M60 machine guns, bring them out to the ship. We usually had ammunition stored on board. Then he would assist me and the crew chief in pre-flight in the ship. And it was my understanding that the gunners that came from the infantry units had been wounded in action, and it was generally wounds that they were able to recuperate in country over a short period of time. And when they were able to return to their units, they were given the choice of going back to their original infantry unit, which most guys did because that's where their buddies were, or they could go to an aviation company as a door gunner, either on a Huey or a Chinook. And a lot of guys took that route. So we always generally had somebody different, but surprisingly, some of the gunners had an aptitude for that kind of work and became crew chiefs, and I think later a couple of them actually became flight engineers. So,
What was the average mission, the time in flight?
we would fly mostly, generally, we'd fly till either all of the missions were completed. I don't know how many missions a day they had, but you had 3 Chinook companies flying. Not necessarily every helicopter in each company, but as they completed a particular mission, they were given another one, and that was to either haul cargo, internal or external, to a certain location, or haul troops. We moved troops around quite a bit, both Americans and South Vietnamese.
Did you fly any rescue missions?
Yeah, we did some stuff like that, but we would generally fly, like I said, till about everything was completed. Sometimes till dusk or into night hours. Sometimes, if it was absolutely necessary to get the missions completed. We had one of the pilots we had was a captain by the name of Klaus Maurer. Klaus was German. He was born in Germany, was raised in Germany during World War II, had a very disagreeable disposition, was not well liked, spoke with a heavy German accent. A lot of the guys said he was probably Hitler Youth, but he was a good pilot, a very good pilot. But he would always volunteer us toward the end of the day. If there were extra missions, we would end up flying extra missions. And it just so happened that we were cleaning up missions one evening, and it happened to be the night the day that the 101st finally took Hamburger Hill, and they needed water and ammunition. So we were tasked to fly water and ammunition to Hamburger Hill, and by this time it was dark. It was night. We had 2 Cobra escorts. We flew till we got fairly close to Hamburger Hill with our navigation lights on. Then the Cobras gave us some space and everybody turned off their nav lights. And on top of Hamburger, one of the GIs, one of the grunts, they had a strobe light. We spotted the strobe light. And we were carrying a large external water blivet, I think maybe a 500-gallon one, externally. We had ammunition inside the ship. So they had cleared an LZ on top of the mountaintop, and we set the water blivet down, and then we landed to offload the ammunition. So I actually got out and I stood on Hamburger Hill on the top of it the night that they had taken the position. When we left, we formed up with the Cobras. We turned our nav lights on once we got clear of the place, and then we hauled butt and got out of there and flew home.
What distance did you have to be from an LZ to be in the clear, generally?
We got a couple miles away from it.
Right.
Because that was all, we used to call it Indian country. It was all hostile territory. Pretty much everything we didn't stand on was hostile. So we did
were
that.
radio comm, were those solid for your entire group of 5 in the ship?
Well,
Could you hear everything that the pilot was hearing? And
we couldn't hear the pilot's transmissions to the other to the 2 Cobras, and we generally couldn't hear air-to-ground transmissions. Sometimes the pilots would adjust the radios where we could hear it, but most of the time we didn't. So it was just basically communications within the crew. So anyway, I remember one time I used to have fun with Maurer. I would kind of mess with his mind if I could, and got caught a couple times doing stuff. And but he asked me one time. He asked me if I liked him, and I says no. And
Why was that?
I just didn't like his disposition. I says, no, I don't like him. I said, but I like flying with you. I said, you're a good pilot. And he was satisfied with that. And a lot of times he would give you instructions in German. One time, this was during the monsoon season, rainy weather, terrible weather. We were someplace and we'd actually sat on the ground. I think we were waiting for him to rig some loads. And he called me up to the cockpit. He always called me Chief. He says, Chief, come to the cockpit. So I walked up there, and there's a little cabinway from the main section of the aircraft into the cockpit area, which is actually pretty cramped. And I leaned over and I says, yes, sir. And he pointed at the airspeed indicator. He says, was ist los? And I looked, and the needle was pegged on 40 knots. We were sitting still. It was actually turned out to be a malfunction with the avionics system. There was an obstruction in the system, and the cold weather actually was a big bug, and it had got in the pitot system and died. And
how big is a big bug?
Well, it was probably a couple inches long. But what happens was, in wet weather, you have the ability to heat the system. So the pilot had turned on the pitot heat, and the bug apparently had swelled up, and this caused the malfunction, the airspeed indicator. We figured that out later. So I looked at the airspeed indicator. Indicated 40 knots at a standstill. And I looked at Maurer and I said, we got a 40-knot headwind. And he says, no, Chief, that is not the problem. So anyway, I liked flying with him. I didn't like his disposition, but he was a really good pilot.
Did you ever find out from him his philosophy on volunteering for the last flight of the day every time?
It was a work ethic, I think. A lot of times, depending on how much time we had available, we'd actually fly back to the Camp Eagle where we were based, and we might have lunch in the mess hall, then we'd continue flying. Well, with Captain Maurer, we carried a couple of cases of sea rations, and we got to have picnics wherever we could land and take some time to eat. So I missed a lot of meals with Captain Maurer, but like I said, I liked flying with him. I felt he had great judgment, great skills, and I felt I was safe with him. So,
How many Chinooks would fly missions, the same mission? Did you generally go out solo, or did you go out with 3 or 2? Or
no, usually we were solo. I think each company had, I think we had 16 aircraft apiece. Of course, not all of them were ever flyable. So we'd launch as many aircraft as we had that were flyable, and so did the other 2 companies. And we'd pass them in flight, carrying stuff. But the only time, a couple of times we flew in larger formations. On July 23rd, 1970, we executed the evacuation of Fire Support Base Ripcord. Hamburger Hill and Ripcord were basically the same battle, only it was over a couple of months. And fire bases were positions out in the countryside. They were artillery positions, but they were situated on the tops of like mountains. They go in there and they clear the top of the mountaintop, and they put an artillery battery. And they were situated in such a manner that they would have interlocking fire. So if one fire base over here was being attacked, the other fire base over here, or 2, could fire supporting fire to support that fire base. And the artillery batteries were 105 millimeter howitzers. And this was universally used throughout Vietnam. Down in the southern part of the country where it was flatter, the fire bases were worn up on elevated positions. But in the central highlands and the northern part of the country, they were all generally at high altitude positions. So anyway, the Ripcord had received a lot of shelling, and it was just determined that it was that they really couldn't support the fire base anymore. It was just too dangerous to fly into it. So they decided to evacuate it. Now, after I got out of the military, I went to work as a deputy sheriff. And one of the guys I worked with, he had been to Vietnam. We got talking one day, and we found out he had been part of an infantry unit that was on Fire Base Ripcord. And I told him, well, I'd gone in and helped evacuate Fire Base Ripcord. And we were kind of surprised that we'd been at the same place, same time, and didn't really know each other. But he said that early that morning they had gone down the side of the mountaintop and they cleared a landing zone. And Hughes had gone in and picked up most of the infantry, which only left a small portion of infantry and riggers on the fire base to rig the essential equipment, which was basically the howitzers. So anyway, the day before we had a real extensive briefing, and then that morning we launched early, and I don't really remember how many Chinooks took part, but we got in a very long trail formation, and my aircraft was down. It had been damaged by a rocket on March 14th, 1970, and it wasn't flyable. So I flew with one of my buddies, a fellow by the name of P.T. Barnum, Doug Barnum, but everybody called him P.T. We went to Ripcord in Varsity 866, which was his ship, and I flew as his crew chief. Anytime I could fly, I'd fly, and I wasn't going to miss out on this. So anyway, we were the lead ship. We low-leveled all the way to where we were near Ripcord, and then we flew up to about 1,800 feet, and we were the first aircraft to fly in and pick up a load. We snagged a howitzer, took off with it, took it back to, I think we took it back to an old dirt airstrip along the coast called Laverne. I can't really remember. But initially, going in the first ship, we didn't draw any ground fire, nothing. We surprised them. But by the time we came back around to go back to get another load,
Firestorm.
we were getting shot at. When we went back in the second time, Doug says, "You want to fly the hold?" I says, "Yeah." So I went down and performed my flight engineer duties, and he flew up on the gun as the crew chief. And we drew extensive direct and indirect ground fire. You can tell when you get hit.
Right below your angle.
You can actually hear the impact of the round on the airframe of the helicopter. So we went in. I snagged a howitzer. We picked it up and we hauled butt out of there. And we knew we'd taken some ground fire, but the pilot later told me, he said everything, all the instruments were in the green. Didn't appear to have any serious problems. He said that he did notice, though, on the right engine, the starboard engine, he says the RPM had just dropped just slightly, but that it wasn't anything really abnormal. So we flew back and delivered that howitzer, turned around to go back, and by this time they had closed the airspace over the firebase. The battalion commander was up in a command and control Huey, and he said, "That's it." By that time, 2 Chinooks had been shot down. They both were able to land on the firebase. They were able to rescue them later. Hughes came in and picked up the crews, but the 2 aircraft were abandoned there. So we flew back to Camp Eagle. We landed. We were shutting down the aircraft. The flight engineer stands behind the aircraft on shutdown, make sure there's no engine fires or any problems. We shut down the port engine. Went to shut down the starboard engine. The pilot moved the engine controls from flight to ground, and then from ground to stop. Engine wouldn't stop. The engine continued to run. So the pilot said, "What do you think, Chief?" And I said, "I'll shut it off for the fuel control." And in the back of the aircraft, below the engine installations, there was a manual fuel control. Had a lever and you could close the valve and shut the fuel off. So I shut the fuel off. The engine slowly quit. Blades slowly stopped and turned down. Pilots got out of the ship. We walked around and we looked at the right engine. And the tail cone had 7 or 8 holes in it, and the cowling covering the engine had 8 or 9 bullet holes in it. What happened was one of the rounds had actually gone completely through the engine, and struck the fuel control. And the fuel controls were mounted inboard on the engines for protection. And it disabled the fuel control, and that's why the engine wouldn't shut down. The control in the cockpit could not activate the control on the engine. So that big old Lycoming took some hits and never quit.
Do you remember the feeling the first time you took fire? Do you remember that today?
Well, actually, the first time I was shot at was actually when I first got to country at 101st Base Camp. Besides our physical conditioning and our training and the other stuff that we're doing, you would draw some, not KP, because that's actually kitchen patrol, but other details. And one of the early days there, I drew an interesting detail. There at the base camp, they didn't have fixed restrooms. We had like outhouses, but they were multiples. They weren't one holders. They would get up sometimes to 8 holders. And in the back of the outhouse, there was a wooden flap. And you lift the flap up, and underneath each hole, there was a 55-gallon drum that had been cut off to about maybe 2.5 or 3 feet, which was the receptacle for the waste product. And I was assigned to burn that waste product. We had another name for it, but I'm not going to say it. You would take this long pole with the hook, and you would drag the barrel out, and you had a 5-gallon jerry can full of diesel fuel and a box of matches, and you'd pour some of the diesel fuel in the 55-gallon drum, and then you'd light it, and you'd burn the waste material. And the real trick was you didn't want to stand in the smoke, but you could get out of the way. And I was doing that detail one day when off in the distance near the airfield, I heard a kaboom. I thought, what the hell is that? And I kind of looked in that direction and heard another kaboom. And I heard something overhead, and I looked up and I saw something go over. Kind of a long object. And what it was a 122 millimeter Soviet tube-launched missile. And they were shooting at the airfield. And when I looked back down, I noticed in my peripheral vision there was a guy laying on the ground, and he says, "You stupid so-and-so, you're getting shot at. Get your butt on the ground." So I lay on the ground and lay there until the rocket attack was over. But that was the first time I was actually shot at. And the other times in the helicopter, it didn't really elicit a lot of emotion for some reason. I never had any premonitions that something would happen to me. I just didn't really think I'd get hurt, whether or not that was stupid on my part or not, but I never did. One thing that I told my wife recently that she didn't know about was that I've actually been hit twice by enemy bullets, but received no physical injury. And both incidents were eerily similar. The first one was, I think I was with Captain Maurer again. We were coming in late. There was a typhoon skirting the coastline. We were like 10 or 12 miles from the coast. It was dusk. It was starting to get dark. The direct, as the crow flies, route back to Camp Eagle was over Way City, the old provincial capital. But we didn't fly over Way City in low light hours or at night because you get shot at. You could fly over it in the daytime, you were safe. But for some reason, there were people down there that didn't like us and they'd shoot at us. So we were kind of skirting around, and I had looked out the right porthole. The Chinook had a series of portholes along the side of the aircraft to look out, but we took the back two on each side out, which enabled the flight engineer, everybody, we all carried our rifles and stuff, that if we had to, we could shoot through those portholes, yeah. We actually, when I first started flying, we carried the old M79 40 millimeter grenade launchers. The blooper looked like a big single barrel shotgun. And I had looked out the right porthole. I could see we were kind of on the outskirts of the city, kind of you might call the suburbs, but all of the structures were very ramshackle and poorly constructed, full using any material the Vietnamese could find. And I walked over and I looked out the left porthole, and since we were so close to home, I had taken off my body armor. And we wore, not like what policemen wear today, ballistic vest. We wore actual heavy ceramic body armor. The contoured plates weighed probably 25 pounds apiece. We wore them in kind of a canvas carrier. There was a plate that you wore in front, one you wore in back. And there was actually a groin plate. I've seen pictures of it, but I never actually saw one. I think the guys in the Hueys would wear them. And we would usually take the back plate out because the things were so heavy. So I had taken my body armor off, I placed it on the seat, and I was kind of looking back to the porthole again, when something hit me in the stomach. And at first I thought I'd been stung by an insect. It felt like a wasp bite. And I grabbed my GF flashlight, and we wore two-piece Nomex flight suits, and I lifted it up. And I looked, and expecting to see a bug, and I saw kind of a red welt on my stomach. But in the light, I looked on the floor, and I could see a bullet. And I recognized what it was. It was a 30 caliber bullet from an M1 carbine, which there was maybe 1 million M1 carbines in Vietnam on both sides. And apparently somebody had shot at us, but from a fair distance. By the time the bullet struck the airframe of the aircraft, it had depleted most of its energy, and when it punched through the fuselage, it was spent, and it hit me, but with enough force where I went, ouch, but no physical damage. And the other time, we generally had pretty good intelligence. The pilots, when they went to we had a commo bunker, and they went in and they picked up some of their equipment, instructions for the day's missions, and we also carried what they called a KY-28, which was a scrambler that went into the avionics system because the Vietnamese would get on our radio channels and screw with us. So what the scrambler did was it scrambled the radio transmissions, so they couldn't understand us. If they said anything, we couldn't understand them. And if there were areas in the country or areas in our area of operations where we might experience or anti-aircraft, because there was AAA over there, just like the guys flew over Germany in World War II experienced. Heavy automatic weapons, in some cases, surface-to-air missiles. The pilots were briefed on these areas, and if we had to overfly them, we flew at a greater altitude out of their range. And we were carrying a load, and I was laying on the floor, and I felt something hit me in the lower leg, and it kind of got up a little ways so I could see, and I saw a mangled copper jacket on the floor of the aircraft, and I thought, what the hell? And I recognized it as a jacket off of a heavy caliber projectile. And then I noticed what looked like a shiny bullet on the floor, but what it was the interior of the projectile. It was probably Might have been a stainless steel penetrator round. I think it might have been an armor-piercing round. I'm not sure. But it had hit the aircraft and had gone so far, and it actually come up and it punched through the side of the ship where the fuel cell is. So it had to go through the exterior of the aircraft, the fuel cell, rubberized fuel cell, and then through the interior wall of the aircraft, and it was spent. And it was just like somebody kind of tapped me on the leg kind of hard. So basically, on 2 instances, I dodged a bullet, kind of. But
What kind of conversations happen on ground when after following an experience like that from you, or did other soldiers talk about that type of event?
Yeah, we did talk about it. You know, I would inform the pilot of what happened, generally in the air. I think on that occasion, after we delivered the load, I walked up in the cockpit and I leaned through and I handed that projectile to the aircraft commander, and he looked. He said, "What the?" I says, "It came through the airframe and hit me." "You're kidding. You okay?" "Yeah, I was okay." But we talk about that stuff. The only thing we didn't particularly talk about was being killed. That was kind of a taboo subject. But between April 9th, 1970 and May 19th, 1970, we took all our casualties during that very short window there. We first had one of the gunners was killed, shot by ground fire. He was actually, we had an evac hospital in Quang Tri, which was usually fairly close. They flew there with him. The crew laid him on the floor and tried to administer first aid to him. When they landed, medics came on board with a stretcher to carry him off, and he told them, "I'm not getting on the stretcher." He said, "I'm going to walk off." And the flight engineer told the pilot, he doesn't want to get on the stretcher, he wants to walk off. The pilot said, "Get him up." So they got him on his feet, and the crew chief and the flight engineer helped him walk off the aircraft, and the medics put him on the stretcher and took him away. And within 20 minutes, he had succumbed to his injuries and died. And then the next aircraft, we had an aircraft delivering some ammunition to Firebase Fuller. The aircraft was the call sign, the last 3 numbers of the serial number were 101, which everybody surmised that someday, 101 will be in the 101st Airborne Museum at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. She didn't make it. They were putting a load of 105 millimeter ammunition in a gun pit at Fuller when across from the fire base there was another peak, and North Vietnamese were there and with mortars, and they fired a mortar round. Mortar round came down, went through the arc of the rotor blades, and hit the aircraft just above the door gunner and exploded, and basically blew the aircraft in half right behind the cockpit. Aircraft, ammunition, everything crashes in the gun pit and starts to burn. So the gunner was killed. The flight engineer the crew chief was seriously injured. He died about a week later of his injuries. The flight engineer was blown off the floor, out the back of the ship, hit the aft transmission going out, broke his arm, was thrashing around on the ground in the back of the ship when one of the grunts there in a bunker looked out, saw him there thrashing, jumped up and ran out and grabbed him and drug him into the bunker. The pilot, a beloved pilot, Bill Meyer, Mr. Meyer, everybody called him Oscar Meyer, and he liked the nickname. He was able to get out of the ship, both sides of the cockpit have jettisonable doors. He jettisoned his door, got out, went around, jettisoned the pilot's door, pulled the pilot out. Pilot was seriously injured. Mr. Meyer was burned too. And then drug him into a bunker, and then Mr. Meyer, not really knowing what the situation was going to be at the fire base, possibility of maybe being overrun, Mr. Meyer gets back in the front section of the aircraft, pulls the KY-28 out. This is what I was told. Walked out, threw it on the ground, pulled out his sidearm, good old 1911 GI pistol, and dispatched the KY-28 laying on the ground, destroyed it so it couldn't be used. And went and got under cover. We were flying that day, and the pilot, aircraft commander said, 101's been shot down, crashed on Fuller. He says, let's go get them. He said there were survivors, let's go get them. And everybody, all the crew in the back, we all yelled. I don't think we needed an intercom to hear each other. We started hauling butt toward Fuller. And when we started to get close, you could actually see the smoke coming off the fire base. And we veered away. We could see there were some cobras kind of buzzing around the fire base there. And we wondered, what's going on? And the pilot said, the airspace over the fire base has been closed, except for cobras. He says they're afraid if we go in and try to get them, we might get shot down. So later that day, a Huey managed to go in and pick up the survivors. The next day, we flew to Quang Tri to the hospital to visit the survivors. It's kind of weird. It was the one and only time in 24 months in country that I ever flew in a Huey. We flew there and we flew back. And we went in to see him.
How different was the Huey to the Chinook for you?
Well, a Huey, it's wide open. In a Chinook, you're actually inside. The only place that's kind of open is the crew chief and the gunner's position, and then the aft part of the aircraft where the ramp is. We have a ramp, hydraulic ramp that goes down, so you can load material and actually load vehicles inside. I've actually hauled a water buffalo inside. And I saw Mr. Meyer, and he was pretty badly burned, and his head there was actually quite a bit of swelling. And he said, Bear, I lost the Queen of the Fleet, referring to 101.
101.
And I told him, couldn't be helped, And that was the last time I saw him. He evidently went stateside. The only member of the crew to come back was the flight engineer. Once his broken arm healed, he came back and kind of gave us a pretty good description of what had happened. And then we lost actually my crew. Gary Brown was my crew chief. Larry Buffington was my gunner. Buffington was my best friend. I wore a memorial bracelet here for him. Larry was older than the rest of us. He'd actually been in the military before. Was a Huey crew chief during the Battle of the Idrang Valley. If you ever watched the movie We Were Soldiers, well, he participated in that battle. He'd been shot down 3 times in the course of that battle, flying as a Huey crew chief. And he got out of the service and got in some trouble involving a firearm. The judge was a family friend, and in court told Larry, says, he says, you can either do time on, he was from Missouri, they still had chain gangs back then. You could spend a considerable amount of time on the chain gang in the road camp, or he could go back in the military. So he decided to go back in the Army, and he ended up with us. He was a real character, didn't care anything about rank. we would meet a lot of or a lot of people, guys that Larry had served with. Matter of fact, sometimes we'd go to the PX, and one of the battalion commanders up there was Colonel Ted Crozier. And Ted's dad was the tank commander that led the relief column that relieved the 101st Airborne at Bastogne during Battle of the Bulge. He led that one. His dad had become a general. And Ted knew Larry pretty intimately. He said, "What are you doing, Buffington, you old so-and-so?" And he got to know me through Buffington. And he said, one day we saw him, and he said, "Maselli, did you know that in my outfit you can wear your sideburns as long as you want?" And I says, "No, sir, I didn't know that." And he says, "Yeah, as long as they're trimmed up to hair." And he put his fingers up right at the top, almost the top of his head. And like I said, Larry didn't care a bit about rank. And if you are killed in action, the Army promotes you one pay grade posthumously. So Larry was a Spec 4, and he was promoted posthumously to the rank of Sergeant E5. And when I put this on every morning, I look at that and I kind of laugh, because I know that Larry would be dumbfounded to know
For promotion.
that he was a sergeant. Anyway, Brown and Buffington had been my regular crew, and unlike the usual situation with door gunners, when I acquired Larry, I kept him. I was on my second tour.
Did you feel safer with one gunner versus another? Is that what was behind keeping him?
Did I feel safer with him? Well, yeah, I think I did. Yeah. I really trusted Larry. We actually had a position. The old B model ships, when they came from the factory, they had gun mounts for the ramp. They actually had a tail gunner. When we got the newer ships and we lost the old B mounts, we took the gun mounts off of the ships and kept them and put them on our new ones. After my aircraft had been damaged in March, I'd been mentoring Gary Brown. He was ready. I went to the flight lieutenant, platoon lieutenant, and I said, "He's ready." And he said, "Okay." So Gary became a flight engineer, was given a ship. Larry told me, he says, "I'm going to go with Gary and kind of keep an eye on him." And I says, "That sounds good." So between that period of time, what we thought was superficial sheet metal damage on my ship 002, it turned out to be structural damage. Could not be repaired at the company level. Each Chinook company had a Boeing Vertol tech rep embedded with the company. That guy got on the horn, called the factory. The factory sent 2 sheet metal specialists to Vietnam to repair my aircraft and then go back home. I'm sure they enjoyed the hell out of that. And so once we found we weren't going to be able to fly it, we were always short of parts. The first thing to go were my engines. And they were having trouble with the big Lycomings. I never had a bit of trouble with my engines. So the engines went as replacements for engines on other aircraft. And they started cannibalizing the aircraft while I was down. So that left me without an aircraft to fly. But I was kind of left on my own. I was totally unsupervised. I would go out and fly. I'd get my helmet, my stuff, and I'd go fly, either as an additional crew member, or I would replace somebody, or I'd fly as a tail gunner on the aft gun mount. I'm totally unsupervised. I went and flew with Gary and Larry several times. Matter of fact, I flew with them just a few days before they were shot down. And anyway, they were apparently hit by probably AAA. They were carrying a load, probably lost flight control hydraulics, and nosed in and crashed, and they were all killed. And then on the 19th of May, we lost another ship. Usually when the weather was bad, and like in the monsoon season and the weather was bad, we would launch a weather ship to fly the AO to see what the weather looked like, to see if conditions were good enough to fly operations. They'd always had a standby ship. So my ship, the one I was flying that day, I was flying as the flight engineer. We were the standbys. We went out and we pre-flighted it. Pilots came out and went through the pre-flight again. They went back to the camo bunker. We closed the ship up, got inside, and went to sleep. And the other ship launched to do the weather check. Within an hour, the pilots were back. I think if I remember right, the pilot was Captain Majors. He looked at me and he said, told me the tail number of the ship. He says, they went down, no survivors, we're launching. I thought, wait a minute. I need a few minutes to grieve here. I'm not ready to go to work. But we launched. We went out and we did a weather check. And they too were apparently hit by anti-aircraft, and they crashed. And one of the crew was replacing a guy that was going on R&R. Sammy Alexander. He was an older guy, been in the Army a while. He's Spec 6, big, tall, hulking character. Phil Arnold and Mr. Schultz were the pilots. Mr. Schultz was the aircraft commander. This guy, Schultz, had been in the Marine Corps, was a jet pilot, flew jet fighters in Korea. Got out of the Marine Corps, joined the Army, decided he wanted to fly helicopters. And this guy, he was a hero to all of us. He had a habit of always asking me my opinion. What do you think we ought to do? We flew up some mobile radar installations up to the fire bases along the DMZ because at night they were hearing rotor wash from helicopters when there were no American helicopters flying. So they suspected they were North Vietnamese helicopters. So the idea was to put a radar station on some of these fire bases. Maybe they could get a fix on these guys. And the Cobra pilots were licking their chops. These guys wanted to launch and get an air-air kill. So as it turned out, that didn't materialize. But when we flew to pick up one of the radar units, and we landed and shut down, and me and Mr. Schultz got out, and he says, he wanted me to look at it. He says, are we going to be able to carry that okay? He was real good about that, and he had a lot of guts. He was just a hell of a great pilot. And he was the aircraft commander. Sammy was killed. Roy Petty, the crew chief, was killed. And the flight engineer was a guy by the name of Smith, who after my guys were killed, Buffington and Brown, Mr. Vander Walker, Mr. Mason, and Steve Wasson, he quit. He had a family at home, a wife and a couple little kids. He was afraid he was going to get killed. And when they were shot down and killed, he felt so guilty, he went back and said, I want to get back on flight status. And he was flying in that ship and was killed. So after that, we suffered no other casualties.
What was the length of a Vietnam tour?
12 months. The Marines went 13 months for some reason. I'm not really sure. At the end of your tour, you had the option, you could extend it 6 months. And then at the end of that period, if you wanted to extend it again, you could do that. And at the end of my tour, I didn't want to go back to the States. There wasn't.
Were you single? Were you single going into the military?
I was single. I had no significant other back home. I liked what I was doing. As a matter of fact, I loved what I was doing. I loved flying. I loved the job. You know, for being just a dumb high school kid, you know, I never experienced any real responsibility. All of a sudden, I was in a position of great responsibility. I had an aptitude for the subject. I became very skilled at what I did, maybe more so because I'd been a mechanic before I became a flight engineer. I was given certain liberties that weren't afforded anybody else. I did some maintenance on the aircraft that actually was at a level above me. I rigged flight controls, which was e-ticket ride. Had to run the aircraft up. When you put a new flight control on the engine, you took the cowling off the sucker. You actually laid, you put a helmet on, you laid between the engine and the aft pylon, the fuselage of the aircraft, while the aircraft was run up. And then talking to the pilot over the intercom, you rigged the two control arms on the flight control, which was, like I said, was on the inboard side of the engine. It was louder than anything you ever heard. It was hotter than anything you ever heard because my feet were on in there by the tail cone, and they were getting nice and toasty. And that's how you did this. And normally flight engineers never did this. This was done by the guys in the engine shop. But when I was a mechanic, I used to go to the engine shop and hang around and say, what's that? What does that do? What does this do? I did it to avionics too, but because I was eager to learn.
Did that give your team an edge?
What's that?
Did that give your team an edge overall?
I think so. I think, I really do think, and we tracked our own blades, which was also an e-ticket, right? Because when you replace the rotor blade, you have to adjust them so they fly on the same track. And what you do is you take a screw out of the leading edge or the end of the rotor blade, and you put a little tracking blade in there, and you take colored pencils and you color each one of the three blades, these little tracking deals, different color. And then you had a long metal pole that had a piece of canvas attached to it, and you'd run the aircraft up, and then you'd actually lean the pole into the turning rotor blades close enough so those little, they stuck out maybe half an inch, so you get grease pencil transfer on the canvas, and you could tell if the blades were flying in the same plane. Then you could make adjustments, and I do that, and I've seen guys do that, and they'd actually catch a rotor blade, and the tracking deal would be pulled out of their hands and thrown 100 feet downrange. It was scary. And they actually had electronic tracking machines to use, and we had them, but they wouldn't work in the climate. They were useless, so we had to manually track the blades. So like I said, I did a lot of stuff like that I really wasn't supposed to do, but nobody said anything.
What word would you get in Vietnam of soldiers who had gone stateside? What did you hear? What was that part of your decision to do a second tour?
No, I think what the decision was it was just, and P.T. Barnum coined the phrase, my buddy. It was the best job I ever had. And as far as I'm concerned, being a flight engineer in Vietnam was the best job I've ever had. Those 24 months, I cherish more than the 32 years I spent full-time as a deputy sheriff, plus an additional 15 years as a reserve officer. Those are more important to me than anything else that I've ever done. It was like I was born to do that. I was, as a kid, I was never successful at anything. I was a numbskull. But in that environment, I was truly successful, and
no more impactful 3 years of your life.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. I liked it. That's why I stayed. That's why I could, after my first 6-month extension, I stayed again. And I think that's what allowed me to have some of the privileges that I got, was because at that point I wasn't there because I had to be there. I was there because I wanted to be there, and that was recognized. And like I said, I kind of did my thing.
What was your last day in Vietnam? What was that day like?
What was that day like? Generally, about 2 weeks before you deros, which was leave country, no matter what position you were in, if you were in the infantry, you went back to a base camp. You were taken out of combat. 2 weeks before you left, you quit flying. I was instructed to go sleep in a bunker and only come out to use the latrine and to eat. Of course, I didn't do that. It was a kind of a sad day, really.
Feel lost? Did you feel lost that day?
I did, not so much at that point, but I got my old ship 002, Balls Deuce, became flyable. We got her back together late August, I think. I got a new crew chief and another gunner. There was a guy there, Norman Bass, that was from Las Vegas, Nevada. Norman actually came to me and told me, he said he wanted to be my crew chief. I said, okay. So when I left, Norman he became a flight engineer and took 002.
By the end of your time in Vietnam, how many hours flight time had you recorded?
I don't specifically know. I would assume. I remember I was told once I had 1,200 hours, but then toward the end, I don't know if they didn't keep track or just neglected to tell me. Probably, maybe close to 2,000 hours. We were awarded air medals, and the basic award was 25 missions over hostile territory. And I received my first one, and then subsequently later, quite a bit later, I received my second through 12th award. And then I think after that, they just didn't even keep track anymore, because we'd probably never got more than 12 air medals. I got another air medal for ripcord, but that was had a V device for Valor. I don't know. I'm really not sure. I know I must have flown a zillion missions, though. We flew every day. The only time we didn't fly was if the aircraft was down for maintenance, or if you were going on an R&R, or if you were sick. I was a Spec 5, E5. I was exempt from any other duties. I didn't pull perimeter guard. I didn't do any KP. I didn't do anything else except
ready to fly.
Involving the ship, yeah.
Right. So as you're flying stateside, do you recall that?
Yeah, I do. We went back to Cameron Bay. We waited there for flights home. I got my 2 cameras stolen while I was in Cameron Bay. They put us in. When we were ready to fly, each day they'd have formation. They'd read off the names of the guys who were going to go home that day. Finally got to that point. We went into a big warehouse. They gave us a 10-minute grace period to dump any contraband items that we might have in our duffel bags. They had big dumpsters in there, and those guys that had contraband items took them out and threw them in the dumpsters. And then at the end of that 10-minute grace period, they said, well, pack your stuff up and get on a bus. They never even checked us. We flew, if I remember correctly, we flew to Okinawa. We were at the terminal there at Okinawa for a couple hours. Across the runway from the terminal, there were B-52s. There were revetments where the B-52s were parked. We watched them. They must have had a strike in Vietnam, and we saw them taxi out real slow. Then they take off. They go by, like they went by us like they were going 40 miles an hour, and I thought, that guy's not going to get off the ground. And they'd almost go completely out of sight, and then you could see them take off and see the black smoke. We flew from Okinawa to Hawaii. We got there about like 4 in the morning. They let us off the airplane. There was nobody in the terminal. Then we flew back to Fort Lewis, Washington. That was where all incoming Vietnam servicemen went to. I got on a bus there at the airport, went on the base. They flew us, or they took us first to, we got fitted for Class A uniforms, so they took our measurements and stuff. They had copies of our service records, so they knew what decorations we had, so they could make the ribbon block and the individual qualification badges like air crewman or combat effort badge or whatever. Then they took us to a mess hall, and it was a dedicated mess hall, and they probably had more than one, and it was just for the Vietnam returning guys. We got a steak dinner. Toughest, grisliest old steak I ever ate, but the best steak maybe I ever ate. And then after that was done, they went back, we put our uniforms on, we went to finance, they paid us off in cash, paid us out. We went and talked to a medical officer, which was intriguing. We were sitting in a room, and he says, if you guys have any injuries or any medical problems whatsoever that you incurred in Vietnam, we want to give you a physical. He says, but you're going to probably be here an extra 2 weeks going through that physical. If you want, you can sign this waiver, which says you incurred no medical problems while in Vietnam, and you can continue to go home. So I passed them out. Everybody signed them. And then we went and we went into another large kind of room. It had state flags all around the coastal ceiling and some other military flags. And the officer that was there was Captain Bieber. I remember him distinctly. And Captain Bieber gave a little kind of a speech. And we each got up individually, and he gave us certificates of appreciation. And kind of a little, well, good luck. Thanks for your service. That was probably before it's ever used here. Whatever else he happened to say, and we completed that. And
Was this still in Okinawa? Was this
no,
still
we're at Fort Lewis, Washington by now.
Okay.
We've flown from Oki to Hawaii to Washington State, and we all sat back down, and he kind of counseled us a little bit. He says, your return may not be appreciated by everyone back home. He says there's a certain amount of unrest right now about the Vietnam War. So he cautioned us. He said, just be warned that this might happen. And then he kind of leaned on his podium for about a minute, and he kind of looked at us, and he said, I don't know what you guys are still doing here. You're not in the Army anymore. There, of course, everybody screamed. We raced out, got in buses, went to the airport. They had given us airline tickets. Flew from Seattle Tacoma Airport to San Francisco Airport. That's where there were some hippies there. And so I was walking through the terminal. This young hippie chick kind of spit at me. And, of course, I was young and agile at the time, and I was able to dodge it. So her loogie missed me, And for a moment, I thought of taking some retaliatory action, but thought better of it. So I had a 16-hour layover. I called my mom at home back in Visalia, told her I was on my way home, told her when I should arrive at Fresno, the air terminal. There was a USO actually in the air terminal, so I went to the USO after I had bought some cigars. They had a refrigerator full of sandwiches. I ate a couple sandwiches. They had pool tables, magazines, books, couches. I think I napped for a while. I played a little pool. Went back and got on the airplane and flew to Fresno, and where they picked me up.
What did you think about in Vietnam, stateside, that you craved, if anything?
Well, overwhelming feeling of grief, or not grief, but guilt, because I had left my friends, and the relationships you develop in the military, especially when they're under combat circumstances, it's like everybody experiences the same thing, and you kind of have a bond with everybody that, I tell you, I think it may be stronger than the bond you have with family members. I mean, I love those guys. The finest group of men I've ever been with. So, and I think a lot of returning Vietnam veterans had those very same feelings. Matter of fact, I know they have. And I felt guilty because I was home and they were still there. And I even had thoughts of re-enlisting with the condition that I go back to my same unit. But the longer I stayed home, those feelings kind of went away. I know that 3 days after I was home, I went down to a local sporting goods store, Dale's Sporting Goods, and I bought a pistol. I didn't feel good without having a firearm. So at that time in California, there was a 3-day waiting period. So 3 days later, I went back. Dale gave me a box of ammunition, went back, got in the car, put the gun in the center console of the car, and kept it around for years. Couldn't sleep in a bed, had to sleep on the floor for a while. It was too uncomfortable.
You still have that gun today?
What's that?
Do you still have that pistol today?
I do not, but I have got a replacement for it. So I have a Browning high power.
Did you keep in contact with any of your
The only
fellow military?
The only people I had the two guys come through that were in the outfit. A guy by the name of Bond and Cook. Cook was from California. Bond was from Michigan, I think. They managed to find me. We spent an evening together down at Shakey's Pizza, drinking beer and eating pizza and talking about over old times and how boring life was, that there was just no more pizzazz anymore. Had a kid from Sacramento named Samaniego that came and visited with me one day. My old buddy, Doug Barnum, P.T. Barnum, that I went to Ripcord with at age 66. He stayed another 6 months. Unfortunately, 866 was transferred out of B Company, went to C Company, was later involved in a crash down by Da Nang in bad weather, flew into the side of a mountain. It had 24 GIs on board. The aircraft exploded on impact, and they didn't find him for about 2 weeks, find the wreckage. So she's gone. And Doug actually came kind of an interesting character. He kind of traveled around the United States visiting guys he'd served with in Vietnam, and he came through and he visited with us for
A week, almost.
was he almost there a week? He had a briefcase full of pictures and memorabilia and stuff, and we kind of filled me in on what happened from the time I left to 6 months later when he left. The company actually returned to the United States. It suffered no further casualties from that May 19th, 1970 date. He was kind of a mooch. But those are about the only people I've had any.
What was your first job out of the military?
My mother owned 40 acres of olives. My father had been a farmer, and I farmed on that property, took care of that for her. But I guess I kind of become a adrenaline junkie a little bit, and I needed something else to do that was more exciting, so I applied for a deputy sheriff's position and a police officer's position locally. Sheriff's Department called me first, and I was hired. I was hired at kind of they had what they called a CETA program, which was where the government would pay a portion of the individual's salary for 3 years if he was a veteran. So I got hired on that CETA program. The county paid me a portion of my pay, and the government paid me the other portion. And at the end of 3 years, that it was discontinued, and the county could either retain me or they could let me go. Well, they retained me. So I became a deputy sheriff, and I did that for 32 years full time.
Now it's all in California?
Yeah, all in California. I want to say one thing, too. As a kid growing up, I was surrounded by World War II veterans. Even in grammar school, the principal was Peckinpah, was a World War II vet. There were teachers and janitors who were World War II vets. There was the guy that owned the service station downtown was a World War II vet. The postmaster was a World War II vet. My dentist was a World War II vet. And as I was going through grammar school and junior high school and high school, there were teachers who were World War II vets. I can remember Mr. Torty was a 7th grade teacher. He had been on a destroyer during the Battle of Okinawa, and the destroyer had been hit by Japanese kamikazes. And he kind of told us a little bit about that. But the vast majority of those guys were pretty mum on the subject. And in Vietnam, I had the honor and the privilege to serve with World War II veterans. We had several in the units, older guys. There was one sergeant, I can't remember his name, I've tried to remember it. He was an E7. I asked him one time, I said, you've been in the Army all this time, how come you're just an E7? He says, I got busted for drinking several times. He was what we call now a functioning alcoholic. And he was going on R&R one day. And I saw him before he left, and he was wearing his khaki uniform with his decorations and combat infantry badge and jump wings. And I noticed on his jump wings there were 3 little silver stars that were affixed to the jump wings. I said, Sarge, what are those 3 little stars? What do those mean? And he says, Maselli, you knothead. He says, I got to teach you everything. He says, each little star signifies a combat jump. He says, I was in the 82nd Airborne in World War II. I participated in 3 of the 4 combat jumps in World War II in Europe, Sicily, Normandy, and Holland for Operation Market Garden. And to all of us young guys in the outfit, those guys were heroes. Those were our heroes, were the World War II guys.
What is kindness and peace? What does kindness and peace look like for you as you reflect on your life and the future?
I'm a big fan of peace and a great fan of kindness. As much as I enjoyed the job that I did, loss in human life, both for my guys, both for the Vietnamese citizens. There's a terrible cost, and you know, we fought a very cruel enemy, but we respected him. They were smart, they were tough, they could kill you with your own garbage. They were great fighters, they were determined, they believed in what they fought in, or fought for. But you can also hate him and be respectful at the same time. I think I don't want to get extraordinarily and narrowly political. My folks were always Democrats, and I won't say that there were good Democrats then and bad Democrats now, but certainly the Democrats have a real problem now. But you know, my folks were there under Franklin Roosevelt's administration, Harry Truman, John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson. You know, I guess I was probably a Democrat, didn't know it. It wasn't until later when I think I came back from Vietnam, and after being a deputy sheriff for a while, I was pretty conservative. So
Did you vote while you were in Vietnam?
Did we vote?
Did you vote while you were in Vietnam?
No, I never voted. Never paid any income tax either, but we were exempt. We didn't have to pay income tax. And I don't know if there was an occasion where I could have voted, but I'm sure that option was open to servicemen in Vietnam.
Do you equate your service with the price of freedom?
Well,
do you attach it?
Not as much, perhaps, as the World War II guys. You know, we weren't fighting for mom and apple pie and baseball in Vietnam, and we weren't really that astute to the political implications. We were fighting for ourselves. We were fighting for our own guys.
One another.
We were fighting for one another, trying to keep each other alive and protect each other. And even servicemen we didn't know, you'd risk your life, probably give your life, to save or protect them. That was just kind of, anyway, in my unit, that was kind of the universal feeling. In World War II, the big picture, you know, I think that's probably the most significant incident, or the most significant that happened during the course of civilization. I think in World War II, that was the only time in world history when the forces were evil, the Axis Empire, the Germans, the Japanese, and the Italians, were actually poised to possibly take control of the world. And if it wasn't for, you know, the Allied forces, primarily the Americans, the British, and the Russians, and of course the Free French, that was prevented. And it's amazing how many democratic nations in the world participated, maybe some not quite so democratic, but were on the democratic side during that war. You know, I never, there were two primary South American countries that participated. Brazilian Air Force fought in Italy, and Brazilian ground forces fought the Germans and the Italians in Italy. And in the Philippines, the liberation of the Philippines in 1945, American ground troops were supported by elements of the Mexican Air Force. The Aztec Eagles, the 201st fighter squadron of the Mexican Air Force. And they lost 5 pilots during the course of that action. And all these other little tiny countries that participated in some form or another, it's quite astonishing to me. I've always been kind of a World War II junkie, and I've read a lot of stuff about it, and it just amazes me.
When you reflect back, would you do it all again?
Yes, in a minute. I think I did tell you that it was the best job I ever had, in my opinion. And if I could physically do it, and I cannot any longer, I would go right back right now and do it right now. When we come in from town, we live out of Wild Horse, and we drive into LARAMIE, and we go by the airport. And certain periods of the year, when you go by out there, I can look over there, and back behind a hangar, there's a Chinook. It's gone right now, but every time I look, every time we pass by, and I've wanted to tell my wife, I'm going to pull in the airport, drive over there. I'm going to go out and go over and say hello to an old friend, because there weren't a whole lot of CH-47s produced for commercial use. They all went to the military, and so obviously that old lady sitting out there at the airport's a veteran. And while I may not know her personally, I know enough about her to want to say hello and maybe pat her on the nose. But she's gone right now. So, but yeah, I'd go back in a New York minute.
What does Veterans Day mean to you?
Well, I think it's much more remembrance than celebration. And it's a time to kind of pay tribute to American veterans, both those that kept the peace and the ones that saw combat. It's time to pay a tribute to them because they made a great sacrifice. I think, and I think there's a common bond. I wear this baseball cap here, and I wear it proudly. I'm proud to be a Vietnam veteran. It's one of the things that happened when I got home. I was kind of shunned. The thing that astounded me was, I compared it to World War II when the whole nation was involved in the war. There was a home front and the war front. Well, in Vietnam, there was no front at home. People went about their business. They did their everyday things. They didn't care about us. They didn't care about the war. They didn't know anything about the war. I saw one guy I went to high school with, and he said, "Hey, what you doing? I haven't seen you in a long time. Where you been?" "What?" "I was in Vietnam." "You were? I didn't know that." There was general apathy. And I've kind of always held a grudge against the American people for treating us like that. And that all kind of changed after, I think, Desert Storm. People tended to start recognizing the veterans. They started to recognizing Vietnam veterans. And of course, 9/11 really changed everything. But I kind of counseled a kid when I was still working that had served in Iraq and was having some issues. And we kind of talked about his experiences, and I told him about some of mine, and he was astounded at the commonality of the experiences. And I said, well, we understand each other. We've been through the same thing. I said, you and I could sit down with a Civil War soldier, maybe a Revolutionary War soldier who fought at Gettysburg, or fought at Valley Forge, maybe somebody from World War II or World War I, and we could sit down and talk, and we'd all understand each other because of the commonality of experience. And that's the way I feel. And it's times like this that, I remember my buddies, and both living and dead, and I try to remember everybody else that participated in keeping our freedom.
Rip Maselli, I have a 4-minute soundbite. If you have the time, I'd love to play it and ask you one more question following it.
I'm retired. I got plenty of time.
Thank you.
I guess was always brought up to believe in this country.
Greatest country on earth.
I've always had an immense amount of pride in our country. I'm a third-generation military member. As a kid, I wanted to serve. It just makes sense to me. It's home.
I was 18 the 21st of April in 43. 2 weeks later, I got my letter from Mr. Presidente. This picture here was taken on the outer edge of Manila. The USS Munda was a Beta flat-top carrier, first one they built. Picked us up in San Diego and we took off for the South Pacific.
I chose to go to Vietnam, serve my country. That was me when I first went over to Vietnam. We did a lot of traveling in Hueys. Four on each side, sitting out with the feet hanging out.
I believe in freedom. It's part of my, it's part of my values, and so, in a word, freedom. And I believe that's worth dying for. That's, at the end of the day, that's what I believe.
These all in here is what was taken on Mindanao. The next morning they called out a detail of 12 people. We loaded on a aircraft and flew to Bougainville, and that's where I joined the squadron at. VMSB 236 was a dive bomber squadron. We was one of the first groups that had the M1 rifle.
What unifies our military is, at the end of the day, it's what we do is it's not a game. Ultimately, there's a loss of life, and I think my first real experience serving in the AOR and serving in a combat arena, I really came to understand that when a life is involved, everybody will drop everything, and like I said, there is not a question about who they are, but how can we help them.
It's a Marine Corps insignia is what it is. I don't care what branch of the service you're in. You're all there for the same reason.
We all fight for the common goal, and that is, one, our nation, and two, for each other.
Oh, yeah, this is a combat infantry badge. And this is the wings where I was an airborne trooper, a paratrooper. Every once in a while, people will still come up to me and if they see my Vietnam hat or whatever and say thank you for your service. And it still means a lot.
When people thank me, I always remind them it's an honor to serve. Everything that I have in my life and everything that I have in my family came from service.
I'd do it all over again if I had to. Every Veterans Day, the older I get, I think the more important it comes to me.
Veterans Day means to me is a time to honor everybody who came forward. They were willing to pay up to everything, including their life.
That's my Bronze Star with B for Valor, and that's the Air Medal.
So we're celebrating those 1%ers that recognize the need to serve our nation. My name is Troy Taylor, and I'm a veteran of the Global War II.
Stephen A. Evans, a veteran of the Vietnam War.
Richard Wayne Motter, I'm a veteran of World War II.
Reaction?
Well, I think it solidifies my opinion. about the commonality of experiences. Everybody who probably did see combat, including the Vietnam guys and even the current guys who went to Afghanistan and Iraq, Korean War veterans, World War II veterans, we all experience basically the same thing and have the same feelings about it. It seems surprising, but to me, it's not surprising. And it kind of scares me when I think about what the nation was becoming. I often wondered, if we had to fight World War II with the young people we have today, would we have much of a chance? But there are still young people out there who are ready to answer the call and step forward. And particularly, in Wyoming, because of its rural background, and rural values. I think there's more of that. But yeah, I think that's a good tribute. I salute them all, remember them all, especially the World War II guys. They're still my heroes.
Rip Maselli, in more than 20 years of broadcast, your time with me today on the Talk Shop is my greatest honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service and the memories that you share and the lessons that history taught you, that you lived through and that you share with generations today, forever forward. Thank you. This is the Talk Shop in Studio 255.